Hey, brand builders, ready to take your brand to the next level? I'm Dana Ammons, and welcome to the Brand Blueprint. Welcome to the Brand Blueprint podcast. I am your host, Dana Ammons, and I am happy to welcome and introduce to you a really special guest today. Today, we have Sylvia Lin with us. And you ask, who is Sylvia Lin? Well, she is an incredibly accomplished marketer whose career spans really global markets from China to Brazil to the UK to the US. She leads and has led FMCG, and for those of you who don't know what that acronym is fast moving consumer goods businesses, and drove strategic growth across multiple companies and brands. She has a lot of expertise in a lot of really cool areas that relate to the brand blueprint, but more importantly, expertise in global portfolio management, profit and loss oversight, which we affectionately call P&L oversight and management. And she also is known for her strategic innovation. Sylvia has a wealth of knowledge that she is here to offer the brand blueprint today, and I cannot wait to get started. So, Sylvia, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Dana. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. And now Sylvia is an old colleague of mine, and I'd love to bring people on the show that I've worked with in the past because I have had the fortune of working with a lot of really smart people. You being one of the people at the top of that list. And I like to always tease you a little bit about your North Carolina roots. And no more of an appropriate time. I was getting prepped for this interview the other night, and I was thinking about, man, what do I ask Sylvia when we get on the call and we talk about, all the things that have happened since she left the country and went on this wild, journey of international corporate opportunities. Then I see this Bill Belichick announcement, and I noticed, like, wow, okay, so the rival North Carolina team has just hired, and not that Dukies are really focused on football, although you guys have been much more competitive in the last several years in that area. What say ye about the Bill Belichick hiring at your rival North Carolina Tar Heels?
Well, funny you should ask. I did see that in the news, although I don't obviously follow North Carolina sports perhaps as closely as I did in the 1990s. Best of luck to Bill Belichick and the Tar Heels. My blood, however, runs Duke blue, not Carolina blue. And because I honestly have not kept up with what's going on with Duke football lately, I'm just going to go with, let's focus on basketball season because it's at the hoops that we're going to dominate.
And I mean, look, you guys have been in the news for your hoops recruiting prowess this past season. You got the clear number one player in the country coming in to play. I am looking forward to watching this kid. He was in a couple of viral clips I saw over the summer, giving some NBA players the business, including LeBron and company over at the Olympics. So shout out to Duke University basketball and the Dukies, who I also happen to share a state home with here in Charlotte, North Carolina. So one of the few things, or many things I should say, that we share in common. But let's slide into the first section of this interview, which is our rapid fire question and answer segment. And the goal of this segment is, frankly, to get a chance for our audience to know you a little bit better on a personal level. We hate to just jump right into the great advice that we know our guests are going to give us. We'd like to first let our guests and our audience get to know each other a little bit better. And so with that, are you ready to jump into our rapid fire question and answer segment?
Ready when you are, my friend.
All right, let's get ready to get started. So first question I always ask every guest, because I'm always curious kind of how you start your day. Are you a tea person or a coffee person, Sylvia?
Ooh, well, I don't drink caffeine.
Non-caffeine?
So I'm actually a water person. You will probably see me drinking from this ginormous bottle throughout today's podcast. I have always been told that I have a lot of energy, AKA once you get to work with me, I get really annoying. But yeah, with all that energy, I don't need caffeine. So I have never really been a tea or coffee drinker because I don't need caffeine to have energy.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, right? Because you have lived and worked in places where coffee is like king. We both worked in New York. You worked in Atlanta. as well with me. And, a trip to the Starbucks during a break at work was kind of like a ritual at Park Avenue. So,
Yep.
given the fact that you don't need any, call it artificial energy or caffeine, leads to my second question, which is morning person or night owl?
Night owl, for sure.
Night owl. Interesting. So, naturally energetic, but also a night owl.
Yeah. I mean, obviously working in the corporate world, you force yourself to be a morning person and you set the alarm and you get up and you're in the office, by 7:30 or 8 o'clock every day. But my natural state of being is go to bed late, wake up late. It's
Wow.
what works for me naturally.
Yep.
Yeah. And what that means is like I'm fine in the morning as long as I can get a shower to wake myself up.
Yeah.
People always ask, oh, do you do better work during the day or during the night? And I'm kind of okay either way, as long as I can get a shower to wake myself up. And then I start pounding the water and I'm all good.
Yeah. Now that's it's funny. We share that affinity for waking up late and going to bed late. And I feel like I frankly had that way of working validated during our time at Colgate. Because the first time I got to Park Avenue and I started working at that office, I remember that the marketing team pretty much ran a 10 to 7, 10 to 8 sort of schedule. And then after they got off, they would go out and kind of hang out and kick it in New York and get back to work the next day. And I remember as a sales guy, we would get there early and come in 6:30, 6:45, 7, be at our desk already, have a little plate of breakfast. And I'd look up and most of my marketing counterparts wasn't rolling in that piece until like 9:30, 9:45. And I always thought to myself, man, I wish I could get sales to buy off on that culture, because for me, that was really a play as well. I mean, in the reality in the sales force was, even if we started at 6:45 because of customer entertainment obligations or after work meetings, sometimes your day didn't end until the same time the marketing teams ended anyway. So I'd be out hanging with the marketing team and not 3, 4 more hours in that day already at the office. But that being said, I definitely am curious. And from an international basis, out of all of your moves, and we'll get into this into the core interview, but were there any cities or places where you found that your stay up late schedule worked against you, either culturally or just because of the job itself?
Well, let's just say that while I was working for multinational corporations, I didn't really get to indulge in my natural stay up late self.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is I'm a really good sleeper, and I can regularly sleep 7 to 8 hours a night with, no caffeine and no melatonin or whatever it is that people
Yeah.
take to fall asleep. Um, but if I was getting up, and again, I would be getting up at 6:30, not getting to the office at 6:30. So a
Yeah.
slightly different
Yeah.
time frame for you. But I would always be in the office by 8. You're right that most of the marketing people that I worked with would slide in like 8:45,
Mhm.
9, because
Mhm.
meetings would start at 9.
Mhm.
Um, but it wasn't really until I retired from the corporate world 3 years ago that I got to actually start living my normal hours.
Yeah.
Today, I have the ability to go to bed late and wake up later. But yeah, when I was working in big companies in any country in
Not
the
so much.
world, I was always in the office by 8, maybe
Yeah.
8:10, the latest. So I kind of, yeah, my natural rhythms and my natural body clock was not indulged for the better part of 3 decades.
Wow, that leads to the next question. Given the experience and the length of experience you've had over multiple countries, multiple companies, what is I would say a hidden gem or a piece of advice that you learned early in your career still holds true today?
Um, I think one of the things I learned when I was in my 20s, which is probably one of the most valuable things I learned as a professional,
Mhm.
is that others' perception of you is the same thing as their reality of you. So
Mm.
this comes in with, coaching and feedback and that kind of thing. But I mean, how many times have people said, "Hey, Dana, I think that you are blah, blah, blah." And you're like, "No, I'm not." But the problem is whatever they think you are, whether they think you're strong or
Yep.
they think you're weak or they think you're analytical or they think you're strategic or, execution oriented, their perception of you becomes their reality of you.
Mhm.
And I feel like when people think about feedback and the input that they receive from other people, a lot of people spend a lot of time denying that, oh no, that's not me, or like that's not my perception of me. But respectfully, it kind of doesn't matter what your perception of you is, because the other person's perception of you is their reality of you. That is who you are to them. And once you accept that, then you get to decide whether or not you want to take the actions that you can take to try to change their perception of you. But their perception of you is their reality. And I think that for a lot of people, myself included, can be a hard pill to swallow, because you're like, no, I'm not this, or I'm not that. I'm much better, or I'm much worse than what you think. Well, it doesn't matter. That's their reality of you.
Yeah, and I mean, I would imagine that's such great advice, because I think about from a career standpoint that people struggle with what their brand is, right? From a corporate or an office or a team culture standpoint. And what they think
Yeah.
their brand is not always what the team or the culture in that office sees their brand as, right? And so I think sometimes there's this tendency to want to, define yourself in some, meaningful way that helps you stand out, right? Helps you really define, like, hey, this is me and this is who I am and this is kind of how I operate. But then you also work in environments, cultures, and for you, probably in countries that don't necessarily have that same sort of flexibility or nuanced view. So we'll get into this into the interview, the core of the interview. But one last question in the rapid fire segment, and we'll go on and jump to that next part of the interview. So you've had a very, very successful career, recently retired, across the FMCG category. If you didn't choose FMCG as a career path, what would you have chosen?
You know what, Dana? That is a really good question. I'm actually not sure what I would have done if I hadn't gone into FMCG. But what I can tell you is, starting from about maybe 13, 14 years old, I actually was part of a youth group, and we did a lot of community service, volunteering. And then I kind of continued doing that sort of throughout my career. It was, I don't want to call it a side hustle because I wasn't making any money, but it was something I did in addition to, a full-time, paid job, whatever. But as soon as I retired, what I tried to do, which seems to be working out so far, is I shifted my focus to philanthropy. And so I am now working with a couple of different nonprofits here in Sydney, Australia. And what's been amazing is I've actually discovered that almost 3 decades of multinational corporate business experience is really, really useful in the nonprofit world, because the people that I work with, they are experts in sustainability. They are experts in people who are suffering from, food insecurity. They are early childhood brain development specialists, and I am none of those people. But what I do have is the ability to manage a budget, to create a strategy, to, herd all the cats as we try to get a lot of different organizations to work together to achieve the same goal. And I would like to wonder, perhaps, that if maybe I didn't go into multinational companies and FMCG, maybe I would have spent some time in philanthropy, because it feeds my soul in a way that, with all due respect to selling toothpaste and Tylenol, there's something about helping those in need that is really rewarding.
I love that. I love that. And that's why we do this segment, because it's important for people to know that it's, to your point, just not about the toothpaste, the soap, or whatever it is that we're selling in our fast moving consumer goods businesses. So I really appreciate you sharing a little bit more about your personal side and some things that will give some insight to people about who Sylvia Lin is outside of her fantastic career. But that being said, now we want to tap into that fantastic career and get some really cool advice to our audience that I know you are ready to deliver. So with that, are you ready to move on to the main interview section?
Let's do it.
All right, great. Let's go. So I really want to start right where we just left off. I mean, you talked a little bit about, and I'm sure people watching the show are going to be fascinated by the fact that somebody that looks as young, as vivacious as you, is somehow retired. So I use the word retirement with quote air quotes for people who are listening to this and not watching. Sylvia is not retirement age on any level. However, she has been blessed enough to retire, right? Which is something that all of us aspire to do at some point, and hopefully on our own accord versus being retired by somebody else entirely, right? So that being said, tell the audience a little bit about your career journey, how you got started, kind of the countries that you touched and jobs that you did. Because what I want to do is then delve from that into why your advice and perspective really matters for those aspiring founders and brand owners, especially those seeking international opportunities.
Sure thing. Sure thing. So again, thanks so much, Dana, for having me on the podcast. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Um, if you sort of think about how did I get to working in FMCG on an international scale, there's the FMCG part and then there's the international. And let me just start by saying that the career plan that I thought I had when I left Duke was not necessarily how things turned out. But I think some of those twists and turns end up, working out really well. So I graduated from Duke University with a double degree in economics and French. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I kind of thought I wanted to be in business. And my senior year, I actually had an offer to work in marketing for Hallmark cards in Kansas City. And I also had an offer to work in finance for General Electric. And I mean, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. So Kansas City, I mean, it's a big Midwestern city. It kind of felt a lot like home. Yep. I totally loved Hallmark cards. Like, I collected them. I sent them out random times. Like, I loved Hallmark cards back when people gave away like paper greeting cards.
Yep.
So I thought this job at Hallmark was going to be great. It seemed like, marketing, FMCG, as you said, fast moving consumer goods, which is kind of like consumer packaged goods in the US, just different terminology. But I was like, marketing, consumer packaged goods, this is what I want to do. And then I was lucky enough to have a quick chat, even though I wasn't part of the Fuqua Business School. I chatted with one of the career counselors at Fuqua. And she was kind enough to talk to an undergrad who was not part of the business school. And she gave me some really good advice. She said, of all the people that she saw coming through the MBA program and wanted to go into FMCG marketing, a lot of them were missing those solid financial and analytical skills. Mm. And she basically said, if you go to General Electric and go into their 2-year finance training program, it's called the Financial Management Program, or was at the time. She was like, they're going to teach you everything you need to know. You're going to be an analytical expert. Nobody's ever going to question whether or not you know how to manage a P&L. Mm. So go do that. It's a 2-year training program, and then leave, go back to business school, and then go into FMCG marketing. And I was like, excellent plan. I really like this. The other thing that she said, which I kind of ignored, was, so I speak English theoretically. I'm a French major, so I'm fluent in French. My parents are immigrants, so I have a little bit of conversational Chinese Mandarin. Mm-hmm. But she was like, you're trilingual, which is not exactly true. She goes, GE is a big company with, offices all over the world. Hallmark is a pretty US-based business. Maybe you'll get to do some international stuff. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Didn't even think about that. So what do? I accepted the job at GE. I took the GMAT when I was still a senior at Duke, because I thought I'm still in study mode. I know how to study.
Which was great advice. That's what they told us back then, right? To take it while you're still in study mode.
I understand standardized testing, so let's take the GMAT now. Great. Okay, I go to GE. I spent 2 years in their financial management program. The training program was amazing. And then I actually went to join GE's corporate audit staff, which is an internal consulting and auditing group.
Really?
And with that last rotation in the training program, GE sent me to Ireland. And then with this internal audit and consulting group, I then ended up working in 6 more countries over the next 2.5 years.
Wow.
And so.
And was that your first international experience post-graduate?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the
GE
first.
Sent me to Ireland. Yep. When GE sent me to Ireland, I was 23.
Yeah.
And I'd never been an expat before. And it was kind of crazy and scary and super awesome and fun and, exciting all at the same time.
Yeah.
And look, the bad news is that my whole plan of like staying at GE for 2 years and then going back to get my MBA, that didn't work out. I ended up staying at GE for 6 years, which for those of you who've taken the GMAT knows that means my GMAT scores expired after 5 years. So I had to take that. Yeah, I had to take that thing again, which was not fun. But the positive side is I had never planned to have an international career, but once I left GE to go back to business school, I basically said, wow, I love working and living in other countries. It's very different from going on vacation. And it's good and it's bad. It is exciting and it's super difficult. But I loved it. There was something about working with people who had a different language, a different culture, a different background from me that was super, super interesting. I think it appealed to, my curiosity and my love for learning. Like if I could be a student of life or a student of the world for the rest of my life, I mean, I love that kind of stuff. So it actually influenced the business schools that I applied to. And it also influenced the choice that I made. So I ended up going to Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania to get my MBA. And my incoming class, my first year class at Wharton, 40% of us were non-US passport holders, which for an American university, that's a lot.
Yep.
And
was that one of the factors that you used in your research? Is that how you figured out Wharton was one of the places that you wanted to go? Very cool.
Exactly. So the key factors for me were, well, I was going from finance and I thought I wanted to move into marketing. Wharton has an incredibly strong finance program and an incredibly strong marketing program. So I kind of felt like, both sides would be my people. And then again, the fact that almost half of my class was non-US passport holders, it meant that I would continue to be surrounded at school by people who came from different places. And, I could ask them all my crazy questions about their country, their language, what they grew up with, what their traditions and, what their cultural norms and mores are and, business practices and how do people behave in the boardroom in Brazil versus in Russia. That kind of stuff. I love it. And so, the whole international piece, it kind of happened to me because GE sent me to all these crazy, unexpected places, but I discovered that I loved it. So again, the whole plan of go to GE, stay for 2 years, go back to business school, that didn't happen. But I'm really glad that it didn't happen because it taught me something that I wouldn't have known and I wouldn't have known to ask when I was 20, 25 years old. So anyway, after that, went to business school, actually did a summer internship at Procter & Gamble, which is back in Cincinnati. So I got to live with mom and dad for the summer, which was awesome. P&G was great because it helped me understand that this was the job I wanted to do and the industry in which I wanted to do it. But I wasn't sure if I wanted to move back to Cincinnati. And so when I was looking during business school for, what company do I want to eventually, work in post-graduation, I ended up at Colgate Palmolive. As you know, that's where we worked together. And one of the main reasons that I chose Colgate is because Colgate's management philosophy is if you want to be a leader in the company, then, and I'm talking about general manager, VP, CEO, COO level. If you want to be a senior level manager in the company, you pretty much need to work outside of your home country. So whether your home country is the United States, like you and me, or whether it's Colombia, like a lot of our colleagues at Colgate, or whether it's China or somewhere else, the movement of leaders from one country to the other is part of the global norm at Colgate.
Part of the succession plan, right?
Exactly. And because of that amazing experience I'd had at GE, where I was like, oh, hey, this is cool. I kind of like it. I was like, well, now I want to find a company where this is the norm and it is a prerequisite to getting promoted and to being a senior manager. And so for me, the fit with Colgate was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so amazing. And then you started at Colgate, you continued in the FMCG category for the rest of your career. But tell me about as you went through these different moves and changed to different countries, um, what were some challenges that you encountered in other countries that brand owners, founders, people who make decisions for brands and services would be surprised or caught off guard by? Like, what were some of those key difference on the international level?
I think I think the things that I don't want to say surprised me, but the things that you don't expect to happen when you move abroad often end up being macroeconomic,
Mm,
cultural,
mhm,
societal changes that nobody could have predicted. So,
mhm,
um, let me give you a couple examples of good and bad things that I got to experience, again, unwittingly when I moved abroad. So, I mentioned that my first expatriate assignment was back in the 1990s.
mhm,
And I actually moved to Ireland with General Electric during a period of time that was called the Celtic Tiger. So that was a period during the 1990s where there was a lot of foreign investment in Ireland.
mhm,
Ireland was becoming like the international call center. There were a lot of people investing in Ireland, building manufacturing plants and putting, regional European offices in Ireland.
mm,
I mean, it was a fantastic time to be in Dublin because everybody was positive and excited, and like Ireland, was taking its place on the global business stage, and people, like, there was an energy in that country that, like, I didn't, because it was the first time I'd really moved abroad to live and work, I didn't realize that that wasn't typical of Ireland until I went back and visited as a tourist later. And you literally could feel that the energy had changed. That
mhm,
sense of optimism and promise and future wasn't necessarily there in the same way that it was when the Celtic Tiger was roaring in the 1990s. So
mhm.
that was a really amazing, unique experience in, like, how awesome to be in a country when it is literally launching on the global stage, right? So, and that's not something that you think about, like you think about, oh, what's going to happen with my product or my job or my career or my paycheck. Mm-mm. This was something that I didn't expect, that was amazingly positive. On the flip side, a few years later, also with GE, but this time in that internal audit and consulting role, GE moved me to Bangkok, Thailand.
Mm, okay.
And those of us who are old enough might also remember that there was a financial crisis that swept
Mhm,
across Asia,
mhm,
and in particular hit the Southeast Asian countries in the late 1990s. And there I was, based in Bangkok, working for GE Capital, GE Financial Services,
mhm,
and we were working on an auto leasing business. So it's all about money. And we were, as all GE businesses do, we were reporting our money, all of our sales and, costs back to the United States, where GE's headquartered. And I was in Bangkok for 4 months during the Southeast Asian financial crisis. And the local currency, the Thai baht, it devalued by 1/3 in the 4 months that I was there. So you can imagine that our sales in Thailand were not
yeah.
tripling in the 4 months that I was there. And yet our contribution to that global US dollar P&L was just getting hacked and hacked and hacked and hacked. And the business fundamentals were strong.
Oh, wow.
But
Wow.
but what do you do when there's a regional financial crisis and your currency is just swirling down the toilet? And that is something that nobody expects, and it's not something that you can plan for, but it is the reality of the places in which you live, because that is the global sort of macroeconomic situation that your business is running in. The last example that I'll give is much more recent. So after I left Colgate Palmolive, I went to work
Mhm,
for Johnson and Johnson,
mhm,
and J&J sent me to China. The original plan was for me to be there from 2018 to 2020. Well, you can imagine that even though my original departure of May 2020, like that was the plan, but that didn't happen because, as all of us know, the global pandemic hit. And all of us had incredible experiences during COVID, a lot of negative and a lot of positive as well. And of course, I never expected to be in China
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
COVID
That's the
19
epicenter.
exploded and hit. Mm-hmm. Yep. So we won't go into the details there because that could be a whole nother podcast.
Definitely is
But
another podcast, and I would encourage our listeners to keep a lookout for that particular episode. That'll be a brand blueprint after hours discussion because I have so many questions to ask about living in China during COVID as an expat. But I
yeah,
digress.
yeah,
So continue.
yeah. So, no, I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is, when people are thinking about either working abroad or moving abroad or expanding their businesses abroad, I think what most of us think about again is the more personal stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to move my stuff? Am I going to have to buy a new house? And what's going to happen to my brand, my product, my service? What is my new
Mhm.
go-to-market strategy? All of
Strategy,
that
exactly.
absolutely important. But I guess the thing that impacts me the most is there are a lot of macroeconomic, societal, cultural
Hmm.
things that are going
Hmm.
on that we cannot control and often we cannot predict. And sort of figuring out how to manage those, or maybe even just how to set your expectations realistically, is really important because the macroeconomic environment can throw you curveballs that, I mean, a little bitty virus can throw you a
Yeah.
curveball that you never expected. And then you're going to have to think about, how am I going to manage that? So keeping that mental agility and thinking beyond just you, yourself, your company, your colleagues is
Hmm.
important because there's a lot of stuff happening, and the US kind of gives us that false security blanket of stability that I think a lot of other countries don't necessarily have.
No, that's great answer and fascinating given the experience, the distinctly different experiences that you encountered at General Motors versus, or GE, I'm sorry, versus Colgate and J&J. And I know some of that tied to their business models. You were working in a financing capacity early on and then moved over to the consumer products channel. But tell me about, in that sense, as you kind of hinted to the fact that from a global level, both personal, brand, and professionally, there are a lot of factors to consider when you move from market to market. Now, you've managed P&Ls at a global level, and I'm sure that there are also some key factors that you need to pay attention to as you manage P&Ls across various international markets. Talk to our audience about, and demystifying the, P&L, because I know you and I can get into our FMCG speak really easy and people are like, what are they talking about? But in general, right, there is an equation there of trying to drive growth and trying to also achieve profitability. And I know going to an international scale for many of the top CPG companies here in the US and globally, that equation is a pretty important and highly focused right equation that unfortunately sometimes small brand owners don't focus on as much. So if you were giving advice to smaller brand owners, knowing your experience from larger brands on that P&L focus, profitability and growth, given all the different economic and consumer dynamics, what advice would you give them?
So I think the focus on profitability versus growth, it can often be dictated by where you are in the life cycle of your business.
Mm.
And when you think about the business life cycle, you've got like a startup, and then you've got a growth period, and then you've got a mature business. And then at some point, maybe, hopefully not for some people, there's a decline.
Mm.
And I think people need to understand that it's actually totally okay to be, I'm going to make it up. Let's say that you start off as a business in the United States and then you decide to expand to Canada and Mexico, as an example. Let's say that you're, 2 years into being into Canada and you're 8 years into being in Mexico. And at one point you realize that the Canadian business is declining. The Mexican business is growing and looks like it has more potential to grow. So that's when you start saying, you know what, maybe the Canadian business is going to be something that we're going to just let it be a mature business. And if it declines, then we're going to, I don't want to say expect that, but prepare ourselves for that potential eventuality.
Yeah.
And we're going to maybe then invest a little bit more into the Mexican business, which means that for that Mexican subsidiary, your profits might decline because you're investing more in, but you're driving that top line growth for further long-term investment. Because again, when you look at that business cycle, Canada would be in that sort of mature, maybe coming to a decline perspective, whereas Mexico is in that growth. We want to accelerate the growth so it can mature and plateau at the highest possible level. And at that point, that's when you're actually reaping the most profits from that business.
I love that.
So it's never sort of a simple grow the top line and nothing else, or grow the bottom line and nothing else. I am guessing that whether you're looking at an international portfolio of different countries or a portfolio of different products, which might have different profitabilities and different supply chain challenges and whatever, I think what a person needs to do, or a business needs to do, is look across that portfolio and figure out, I mean, this really gets back to the old, BCG 2x2 strategy matrix, right? Where you've got like the star and the cash cow and the dog and the question mark. I know we've had that for like decades, but I feel like it's really useful and a really easy way to start thinking about how you want to manage your businesses. And let me also add, here's what I would recommend people don't do. Because I did work with a group, and they will remain unnamed, where their portfolio strategy was every single business, every single brand in this portfolio is going to grow double digits. And I mean, respectfully, that's a really naive strategy. It's a really naive way to manage a portfolio of businesses that is a global portfolio. Realistically, the business that I was working on, I felt like it should have been in sort of the milk category and not growing double digits. There were other businesses within the portfolios that my colleagues were managing. And I was like, you guys need to be in the star growth, part of that 2x2 BCG. So, let's make sure that we are creating smart strategies across a global portfolio and or a brand, product, et cetera, portfolio. Because I feel like it's the naive and perhaps unstudied and people who are just like, hey, let's grow everywhere. World domination, right?
Which is the startup crowd, which is the crowd we're talking to, which is why I think that was great advice. And let's follow up on that advice, Sylvia. What I want you to also continue kind of down that same conversational line is you just gave great advice on managing and balancing that P&L need for growth and for profit across multiple countries, right? Multiple markets. Now talk to me about how do you make the decision on what to innovate and how to innovate across these same markets, right? Because one would argue, I'm listening to you, and I would say, okay, Sylvia, my mind would say then that if I've got a Canada that is maturing and maybe even declining, and I got a Mexico that's growing, that I need to just innovate in Mexico. And I need to focus my innovation around my Mexican consumer because my Canadian consumer is not popping right now. What would you say to that?
So I feel like there are sort of two parts to this. The first part is going to be super basic. Depending on the product category that you're in, start with regulatory. And I say that because the last business that I worked with at Johnson & Johnson was the OTC medications business. And OTC regulations in China, when I was there, super complicated. And we had so many great ideas for what we could do with Tylenol and Motrin and all of these different drugs. And like literally the government regulations wouldn't allow us to do it. So
Wow.
that is sort of, a dotted line
Know the
within
market
which
first from
people
a
have to work.
regulatory standpoint. Love it.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and that, I don't want to say that's basic, but like, if you need to hire a really strong regulatory partner, I had an
Yep.
amazing regulatory team and they were fantastic. So they helped draw those borders so we
Hmm.
knew, what our
What you
dance
could and
moves
what you
were,
couldn't
right?
do. Yeah, great point.
Exactly. So I'm assuming though that most of your listeners are probably not working in a regulatory,
Correct.
influence space.
Correct.
In that case, to me, absolutely the most important thing is consumer insights.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding your consumers is so critical. And what we should be focusing on is the consumer unmet need. Because odds are your product category or your service category already exists. But there are things that aren't going well with the products and the services that are currently in the market. So, what are those unmet needs that you could maybe capture?
Wow, that was a really important point. Can we hear that again?
To me, absolutely the most important thing is consumer insights.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding your consumers is so critical. And what we should be focusing on is the consumer unmet need. Because odds are your product category or your service category already exists. But there are things that aren't going well with the products and the services that are currently in the market. So, what are those unmet needs that you could maybe capture?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding those insights is so important. And, Dana, when you and I were at Colgate, we talked about laddering up all the time, right? It's what is your mode of action? Like, what technically, scientifically is happening? And then what are the technical benefits? And then what are the emotional benefits that your consumer can get out of this? So let me actually use a China OTC example. So
Okay.
in China, Motrin, which is like Advil,
Mm-hmm.
ibuprofen, that mode of action of ibuprofen is basically it reduces the hormones that impact fever and inflammation. And Motrin in China is primarily a pediatric fever medication.
Medication. Mm-hmm.
So clearly, the technical benefit of giving your child Motrin is to reduce their fever, reduce their discomfort, reduce their pain, they stop crying, things like that. But when you think about the consumer insight, yes, absolutely, we want to decrease your baby's pain, right? Because that's heartbreaking. But you got to ladder up to not only the fever reduction, but also the emotional benefit of it brings me peace of mind as a parent. It makes me stop crying as a parent. It makes me feel like I'm a good parent who knows how to take care of my children. And thinking about not only what is this going to do to my body, but what are the technical benefits and what are the emotional benefits, that laddering up
Yeah.
and digging into your consumer insights to understand what that ladder up is
And
super
how it might
critical.
differ by culture and country, right?
Yeah.
Because it could
Yeah.
be different based on the category and based on the usage of the product. I love that example. And I think of products that we worked on together at places like Colgate in the personal care category, right? What does it do to your body is a very important question that could change from a cultural standpoint, depending on the product. There may be cultures
Yeah.
that see that particular product that you're selling as something that they actually don't use on their body or in their body, where it may be accepted here in the US, which tends to be the case sometimes. We in the US tend to assume that other cultures consume, eat, use, and live just like we do, and often find out the hard way when we try to take a product or a service to the international market that other cultures don't perceive those services or brands in the same way, and frankly have potentially different needs that those products or services may not necessarily address, even though they look the same from afar. So love that advice, and I love that ladder up piece, and just really the basic advice around using data and consumer insights as the first place to start. Now, as you
Yep.
migrated through various, oh, go on, you have one thing to add there.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'll give you a really simple example of
Yeah, love it.
how that insight and that laddering up actually manifested in different product executions in different regions.
Yeah.
So when I was working for Johnson and Johnson, I was working in the beauty group, and one of our products was body lotion. And if you start again with that high level emotional benefit of, I want to feel confident, I want to feel sexy, I want my skin to be beautiful looking and, and to be smooth and that kind of thing. Well, body lotion can
Yeah.
impact that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were looking at, which is not a surprise to people who work in the body lotion category today, is we were looking at putting some kind of sparkle into our body lotion, right? Because if you're
Yeah.
going to be moisturizing your skin anyway,
Yeah.
and for many people in many cultures, their arms and their legs are things that, especially during the summer, might be exposed.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's literally as simple as putting glitter. I mean, not exactly glitter, but it's, sparkly stuff into your lotion.
Mm-hmm.
And the brand that I was working on, our three key countries or regions were Brazil, China, and the Middle East. And if you think about that emotional need of wanting to be confident, wanting to feel good about yourself, maybe even wanting to feel sexy, and you think about how body lotion with sparkle plays into that.
Right.
So our consumers in the Middle East, they wanted maximum glitter, right? Like when you think about the formulation, they wanted lots of sparkle. And a lot of that had to do with when their skin was covered and when their skin was uncovered and the people with whom their skin was uncovered, right? Then Brazil, the consumers in Brazil were like, I wouldn't mind a little bit of sparkle, but I don't want that much. Like, I don't need as much. When we were product testing, they were like, we love the idea of having a little bit of sparkle and shine, but this is way too much glitter, people. Right?
They're like, yeah, I don't want to bling bling.
Right. They want a little, but not to the same degree.
But not a lot.
And then our consumers in China were like, what?
Yeah,
I don't want my skin to shine and sparkle. Like, what are you talking
about? At all.
So there were other ways to actually make Chinese consumers feel confident, like their skin was touchably soft, things like that.
Yeah.
But putting a little bit of sparkle in it
wasn't
not
one
the
of
answer
them.
for them. Right?
Yeah, amazing
so again,
example.
Same emotional benefit, but the actual execution was slightly different in each region.
I love that. Now, as we all aspire to get to an international market as brand owners and founders, one of the things that I think is a bit of a misnomer is that your product has to be translated from a packaging standpoint and a language standpoint, and you have to make sure that you are aware of every cultural norm and potential faux pas. You've worked for plenty of countries and overseen, innovation practices across these companies. What would you say about some of the common misperceptions that brand owners and founders, smaller brands and companies may have about the necessary things that are required to transition your product from the US market into an international market?
I'm actually going to stick with insights and humanity for a second. I think the one thing that is true is fundamentally we're all human, right? Like, I think some of those foundational insights are probably going to be global. So let me take an oral care example, because you and I worked at Colgate. All of us want to have no pain in our mouths, in our teeth. All of us want to keep our teeth for the rest of our lives because eating and food tends to be the center of a lot of cultural activities. And for a lot of us, eating is joyful. It has a social aspect to it. So I think there are some foundational insights that are going to be universal. And I think we need to all understand those and figure out which ones are universal and which ones are not. But similar to the body lotion example that I just gave, I think there are going to be some executional differences. And again, sticking with toothpaste. So when you come from the US perspective, We think that the most basic toothpaste flavor is mint.
Hmm.
And I mean, whether it's spearmint or peppermint or wintergreen, like it's just
Some
mint.
kind of mint.
And we used to
Yep.
joke it. And we joked at Colgate, they were like, what flavor would you like? Mint, mint, or mint, right?
Yep.
So it's super basic for the American toothpaste palate. But again, talking about China, the basic original toothpaste flavor is tutti frutti, which basically tastes like bubble gum to Americans. Yeah, right? So I feel like we need to understand what those foundational universal insights are, keeping our
Yep.
teeth. Food means family and joy and culture
Mhm.
and society. But then I think there are executional differences that we need to pay attention to.
Can we hear that again?
So I feel like we need to understand what those foundational universal insights are, keeping our
Yep.
teeth. Food means family and joy and culture
Mhm.
and society.
Mhm.
But then I think there are executional differences that we need to pay attention to, right?
I love that. Yep.
Tea flavored um,
Ice
toothpaste works
cream.
well in China.
Yep.
Well, yeah, that too.
Yep.
Salt flavored toothpaste works really well in India.
Wow, really?
Not so much in the other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think just parsing out the difference between what are those foundational human universal insights versus what are the differences that we need to make in our execution. And to the point that you made, Dana, flavors, go to market,
Mhm.
packaging,
Mhm.
language, to me, those are executional
Mhm.
differences
Mhm.
that are fundamental as well. But I think we need to separate out what are those foundational human insights versus what are the execution differences that actually do need to be managed and managed well. And for that reason, um, and to your point, I've only worked for enormous companies. I've never worked for a startup, but what I do think works really well is making sure that you have the ability to source those local executional insights, whether
Yeah.
you have a local innovation center, whether you have a local insight center of excellence, whether you have found an online group of super users of your product category who have
Mhm.
so many opinions and can't wait to tell you, right? Like, you don't have to open up an office for innovation. There are 100 ways online today to find people who can help give you those insights. And I think what a lot of us discover when we're looking for insights is there are a lot of opinionated consumers out there who can't wait to tell you what they think. So just make sure that you tap into those local insights so that you can understand what is foundational human universal behavior and beliefs versus what are the executional things that need to change from one
For
country or
that
one
market. Yeah.
region to the other.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love, and I mean, one of the, before we wrap up the interview, that is actually a great point because I think there is a bit of a misunderstanding about the effects of globalization and how that should affect, right, your strategy from a local market strategy and from an overall global strategy. So before we finish, if you think about and you look into your crystal ball at the expertise that you have, what would you say to our audience about where you see the effects of globalization versus that approach of local marketing and local programming to really kind of tie the two together? Where do you see those trends going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Look, I am not good with the crystal ball, but the I think the trend that has been ongoing and probably will continue to happen is the opportunity for small businesses and niche products and services. Our market, even though, fast moving consumer goods has been a mass market product for so long,
Yeah.
I think everything is becoming more fragmented. Consumer communications, consumer outreach, influencers, it as things become more fragmented. The good news is there's a lot of opportunity. The bad news is that it becomes harder and harder to win and dominate on a mass scale that some of the old, companies like Colgate, Palmolive, and J&J were able to do in the past. What I would advise new business owners and leaders to think about, though, is what is your USP, your unique selling proposition?
Yep.
There must be something different about your product, your service, your go-to-market strategy. Again, there's something unique about what you're doing. Your target audience, again, whatever your USP is,
Yep.
focus on it, tell everybody about it, and then own it. And find out how you can leverage that USP in, different markets, maybe adjacent categories, in different services that would be adjacent to your product. But understanding what you do well and how it is different from other people, that is where I think people should focus, especially as this market becomes increasingly fragmented and niche.
Yeah.
Whoa. We need to hear that one more time.
What is your USP, your unique selling proposition?
Yep.
There must be something different about your product, your service, your go-to-market strategy. Again, there's something unique about what you're doing. Your target audience, again, whatever your USP is, focus on it, tell everybody about it, and then own it. And find out how you can leverage that USP in, different markets, maybe adjacent categories, in different services that would be adjacent to your product. But understanding what you do well and how it is different from other people, that is where I think people should focus, especially as this market becomes increasingly fragmented and niche.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean that there at that very end is one of the key answers that I want this crowd to understand, is that the market, while you hear this term thrown around on globalization, the market is becoming more and more personalized, more and more niche driven. And if you're not finding your audience within that global audience and really understanding what they need, you're going to miss the boat. And one of the things I love that you said right there, that I talk so much about with my clients, is about understanding what is your unique value proposition, right? Like, what makes you different. And I think one of the things that I want to double tap on and just add to that quickly is understanding that different doesn't always mean better. So it means your difference needs to actually matter to the audience that you are actually targeting. Just because you all of a sudden come with a red set of shoes because everybody else does black doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sell more shoes simply because you're red, and that means you're different. Difference has to matter to the target audience, right? And if the difference is meaningful and it matters, then you execute. Talk a little bit about that, Sylvia, because I know we spent a lot of time in our corporate careers fighting this, notion of, hey, this is time to start talking innovation again. It's time to start talking a new product cycle. Hey, let's just do a blue one this time, right? Or let's do a small one. Let's do an 8-ounce instead of a 15-ounce. That's what the people want. It's different. And different doesn't always mean better.
Agree 1,000%. And this is where I'm actually going to tie back to that consumer insight, unmet need thing. So whether you're talking about a new product, a new service, a new go-to-market strategy, a new country, don't enter that product, service, go-to-market strategy, or country unless you are fulfilling an unmet consumer need. Because if the market is saturated, to your point, with black shoes or red shoes or blue shoes, and you're coming in with another color, people don't need more shoes. So make sure that your insight is basically being paid off, if you will, with your USP. That unmet consumer need needs to be met by you and your unique selling proposition. So they are absolutely related. And that is how you, as a company, as a leader, will create a competitive advantage in your marketplace. But if
Yep.
you're not meeting an unmet consumer need, or you don't understand your consumers' needs, or if you don't have a unique selling proposition, something that you are doing better than everyone else, then you just become a me too. And like you said, I mean, the marketplace is so fragmented and everybody's personalizing.
Yep.
And arguably, the FMCG marketplace is saturated.
Yep.
There is way too much choice. People are confused. They basically do what their mom does, or their neighbor does, or their best friend does, or some influencer tells
Or
them.
the Amazon recommendations tell you to, right? Like there's so much
Totally.
stuff to sift through, right? You just almost have to go with the stars and the total number of reviews, even if the qualities and the features don't technically match what you're looking for.
Yep. Yep. And it is totally possible that maybe your USP is that you are on the Oprah Winfrey recommendation list. Well,
Correct.
okay.
Correct.
But what that means is, making it up, if you are going to expand your amazing product, or maybe not so amazing product, to another country, that means that you've got to find the equivalent of the Oprah Winfrey
In
Reco,
that country or
right?
that
Because
market.
if
Yep.
Oprah is your USP, then how do you replicate that in other
Yep.
places?
Yep.
And often it's not as easy.
I love that. I mean, that is a really cool insight because to your point, there are times when your differentiator in the US market is irrelevant on the international market, right? Because that
Yeah.
differentiator is either tied to a cultural significant norm or a foundational cultural person or personality or movement or particular entity that has no similar recognition on the international level. And I love that you bring that up because one of the key areas I can think of off the top of my head of just clients that I work with are clients that have products that are based on or focused in the sports market, and specifically in sports like football. American football is uniquely American. And so products that fit and focus on people who are involved or fans of American football will likely not translate as well or directly when you take that international. And
Yeah.
sometimes, unfortunately, founders don't think about that before they jump in, right? You just kind of assume, oh, people are people, and I should be able to sell this concept in multiple markets. And that's not always the case. And so I really love that direction on understanding as well the emotional, right, benefits, not just the technical, not just what people are using it for. Because if you can get to that emotional understanding, that then can lead to the aha of what actually will make your product relevant in that new market, right? In that international market. And so, look, this has been a fascinating conversation, Sylvia, as you and I have always enjoyed, really long, winding over, probably overly intellectual conversations about a variety of topics that most of our audience would care less about hearing about today. But I am glad to have you on for a topic that I know they are excited about, and that is branding and really making some of these fundamental, P&L decisions on an international basis. And who better to have on the show to advise them than a friend of mine who has been an expert in this area for over 30 years, who is somebody that I really revere. And I am hoping to have back on the show for some additional episodes in 2025, which we are less than 14 days away from entering into. So, with that being said, as we get ready to wrap up the show, Sylvia, any other advice for aspiring founders and brand owners as we head into a new year in 2025 and a bit, I would say, in the U.S. side of a unknown entity, given a new administration change, a lot of changing trends from a technology standpoint, AI being a huge driver of innovation moving forward. Tell us about what you think we have in store for us in 2025 on the international front.
Wow. Again, crystal balling is not my specialty, but in terms of things that I would recommend people do in 2025, if you want to make
Mhm.
this like your New Year's resolution,
Yep.
I think the one thing that a lot of us in FMCG don't do enough is what we called at Colgate getting external. And okay, you worked in sales, you were external all the
Yeah.
time. Those of us who worked in the office were not. And what I would encourage people to do is to get out there and understand the consumer journey and understand it repeatedly, because it changes over time and it changes depending on which consumers you're talking to, and it changes depending
So
on
true.
the product category or the country, and whether you're doing home visits or focus groups or retail visits, or whether you are grilling your friends when you're out for drinks, or whether you are asking your family questions over Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, the number of times that I turned like social interactions into kind of, basic individual, like IDI individual interviews. I'd be like, so what happens
Yeah.
to you when you go to the dentist? So when your baby has a fever, what do you do? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
you can get all kinds of insights from your
Mhm.
friends and family and neighbors.
Mhm.
And I would recommend that we all just stay curious,
Yep. Get
ask
external.
questions,
Yep.
listen to the answers, and be a humble student of other people's experiences, because other people's experiences are the way that they interact with the world and the way that they interact with your products and services. So understand what they do. And there are always going to be some outliers. But every time I went out and talked to consumers or observed them in a store, I learned something new every single time. And sometimes it would reconfirm a hypothesis that I had. And sometimes it would completely upend what I thought I understood.
Yeah.
And I loved when that happened, because I was like, oh, that's a whole new insight that I didn't know 2 days ago, 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So for 2025, I don't know what's going to happen to the world, but I would love for all of us to just get closer to our consumers and our consumers' journeys so that we can understand them better.
I love that. I appreciate it. We are excited at the Brand Blueprint about what 2025 has in store. It has been a pretty exciting and an action-packed 2024. Sylvia, thanks again for sharing such wonderful insights on the show today. I really appreciate you joining the show. Hope to have you on again to share more wonderful insights. And for our audience, as you are listening and watching, we will have Sylvia's profile on our website as usual, thebrandblueprint.biz. There also will be a link to a previous TEDx talk that Sylvia presented last year. And so I'd love to share that with our listeners and our audience. In the meantime, if you have any additional questions, feedback on this episode, feel free to send it to us on our various social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. So once again, thank you for attending the show and tuning in. And we appreciate all of you who follow the Brand Blueprint on our various platforms and on our website. We are going into the holiday season, and so this interview will probably be airing in the 2025 timeframe, early in January. But make sure you go back and check out all of the exciting content from this capsule and our previous capsules. Once again, this is Dana Ammons from the Brand Blueprint signing off. Have a great day and make your brand the best by following the Brand Blueprint and all of the content that we have to help you take your brand to the next level. Thanks for joining us on the Brand Blueprint journey. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms to stay updated. Watch the full episodes on our YouTube channel for an in-depth experience. Don't forget to subscribe to our website at thebrandblueprint.biz for exclusive content and materials. We're everywhere you need us to be.